Today we're at the Dud Corner Cemetery, and we're here to talk about the wall that surrounds it, because on this wall are the names of more than 20,000 men. This is the Loos Memorial to the Missing, commemorating more than 20,000 soldiers who have no known grave who were killed here during the Battle of Loos. So the Loos Memorial incorporates the side walls and the rear wall here of Dud Corner Cemetery. It has the names of 20,610 men who died during or after the Battle of Loos, which started on the 25th of September 1915, just here in this area. Today, we're going to take a look around. We're going to talk about some of the stories of some of the men who are named here on the memorial. I'm going to start to formulate some of the story around the Battle of Loos. So before we start to take a look at the memorial, let's just briefly touch on why there are so many missing men from this battle. The Battle of Loos was actually relatively short, but the problem was during that time was that the battle lines remained largely unchanged. And in fact, the British were not going to be able to clear their casualties from this section of battlefield around here until pretty much the end of the war 4 years later. That, of course, meant that those men had laid out in that land for years, and sadly you can imagine what happened to a human body during that time. It made it almost impossible to be able to identify anybody. The other challenge that they had is during that earlier part of the war, it wasn't commonplace for men to carry two different identity tags. They would just have one. So quite often, if a soldier was hit and fell, maybe their officer or maybe a comrade might take that identity medal to signify that they were killed. Then, of course, later when that body was cleared, it meant there was no identity disc left with the body itself. And that too made it almost impossible to identify who that person was. That combined, of course, with the fact that by the end of the battle, by the end of the war even, the land around here was just like a moonscape. Even men who maybe had been buried in marked graves, their graves might have been destroyed by artillery fire later on in the war. And then again, that meant that their grave had been lost. So that's just a little bit of an idea to talk about why there are so many missing men from a battle really that only lasted just a few weeks here in 1915. So we're going to take a little wander around the cemetery here and look at some of the names on the memorial to the missing. And we're going to start doing that by telling the stories of 3 Victoria Cross winners who are named here on the panels. So the first man we're going to talk about is named on the panel just here above me, and this is Lieutenant Colonel Angus Douglas Hamilton. So when you see Angus Hamilton's name here on the panel, you can see it has VC next to it, showing that he is a Victoria Cross winner. So Angus Douglas Hamilton actually was commissioned into the Queen's Own Camerton Highlanders in 1884. He served all around the world and then actually retired in 1912. At the outbreak of the war in August 1914, he was 50 years old, but he was recalled and he was promoted to a lieutenant colonel, again in the Queen's Own Camerton Highlanders. He was commanding the 6th Battalion and he was involved in the battle here at Loos. During the opening days of the Battle of Loos, Douglas Hamilton was leading his men on the slopes of Hill 70. Men to his left and right had been pushed back and had retired, and yet he roused his troops forwards again and again, leading by example. The 4th time, leading from the front as he moved forwards, he was hit and killed. His body was never recovered, and that's why he's named here on the Loos Memorial. But for his brave efforts, he was awarded the Victoria Cross. So the next man we've come to talk about is named just here on the panel, and again you can see the VC next to his name. This is George Peachment, and he was killed here in the Battle of Loos when he was only 18 years old. On the 25th of September during the Battle of Loos, George Stanley Peachment would perform actions that would lead to him being awarded the Victoria Cross. And his citation in the London Gazette reads, "For most conspicuous bravery near Hullock on the 25th of September 1915, during very heavy fighting when our front line was compelled to retire in order to reorganise. Private Peachment, seeing his company commander, Captain Dubbs, lying wounded, crawled to assist him. The enemy's fire was intense, but although there was a shell hole quite close in which a few men had taken cover, Private Peachment never thought of saving himself. He knelt in the open by his officer and tried to help him, but while doing this he was first wounded by a bomb and a minute later mortally wounded by a rifle bullet. He was one of the youngest men in his battalion and gave this splendid example of courage and self-sacrifice." Those brave actions here in the Battle of Loos at only 18 years old. George Stanley Peachment, Victoria Cross recipient. Again, his body was never recovered after those brave actions, and that's why he's named here on the Loos Memorial. So we've got one more Victoria Cross winner who we need to go and talk about. So the third name we're here to talk about is just named here on the panel. This is Second Lieutenant Frank Bernard Wern. And again, you can see the VC next to his name here. Now, Frank was actually killed later in the war. He wasn't killed directly in the Battle of Loos in 1915. He was killed in 1917. So on the 28th of June 1917, there was still fighting in this area, and a little bit east of Loos. Frank Bernard Wern was leading his men forwards when he realised his left flank was being pushed back. He realised there that if the left flank was lost, then the whole position would be overrun. So he jumped forwards up onto the parapet and he ran forwards, covering that left flank, throwing bombs as he went. That action roused his men, who also supported him and tried to move forwards. But as he ran forwards there, throwing those bombs at the enemy, he was wounded and then wounded again. The second wound was fatal and he died of those wounds. But for his bravery, he was awarded the Victoria Cross. Again, his body was never recovered in 1917, and that's why he's named here on the Loos Memorial. Now, we can't come here to the Dud Corner Cemetery and just talk about the memorial without touching on the cemetery itself. So the name Dud Corner Cemetery is believed to have come from a huge amount of unexploded enemy artillery shells that were found in this area, hence the Dud Corner, Dud shells. During the actual fighting in this area, there were only a handful of graves that were put here. That's 4 officers from the 9th Black Watch and then a private from the Royal Dublin Fusiliers. Since then, of course, it's been expanded and there's now more than 2,000 men buried here. More than half of those are unidentified. Now, of course, it's very possible and in fact very likely that some of the unidentified men who are buried here are named on the walls around the edge. But nonetheless, as per the bodies being lost and the no known graves, more than half of the graves in this cemetery are unknown. So here in the cemetery, just near kind of plot 2, you have this little section. So these are the original graves that were here at the time of the war. We have Lieutenant Colonel Henderson of the Black Watch, killed 27th of September. We have Captain Graham again of the Black Watch, also killed 25th in September. We've got Captain Bell on the same day, killed 25th of September from the Black Watch. And finally, Second Lieutenant Miller, killed on the 25th to 27th. Don't know an exact date of death. And all of these are the 4 officers from the Black Watch. Then just next to them, here we have Private Byrne, Byrne, that'll be Byrne, of the Royal Dublin Fusiliers, killed on the 4th of January 1916 in this area. So those are the 5 original graves, and of course since been expanded to more than 2,000. Now, one of the things they have here at the Dug Corner Cemetery is a viewing platform, which is really interesting. You can come up here and really get a feel of the land. The first thing you notice here is how open and flat that it is. This must have been a hellish place to attack. So open, so flat. No wonder there were so many casualties here. So you get a view here across the cemetery with the Loos Memorial on the walls surrounding it. And again, you can see the landscape here is just so open. You can see across 2 fairly sort of famous landscape of the Loos battlefields is the 2 giant slag heaps over there. And of course, we've already talked a little bit about this area in our opening video for the Loos series. So I hope you guys found this one interesting, taking a look at the Loos Memorial and the Dug Corner Cemetery where it sits. It's always fascinating to come to places like this, and of course tragically sad, the number of casualties, and perhaps even more notable, the number of missing men from a battle that was relatively short here at Loos. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you on the next one.